On what seemed like just another ordinary morning, millions of Americans turned on their televisions to receive the day's first headlines from the Today Show. But that day, the familiar seat beside Hoda Kotb sat unusually empty. No official explanation was immediately given, only a strange silence hanging over the studio, a place normally fueled by non-stop energy and polished rhythm. The absence of Savannah Guthrie, the program's trusted leading voice, quickly sent shockwaves through the public. News of her sudden hospitalization spread like wildfire, throwing social media into confusion and concern. For millions of viewers, it was not simply the absence of a television host. It felt like the disruption of a deeply rooted routine, the disappearance of a familiar voice that had guided them through countless moments of uncertainty. As scattered details about her condition slowly emerged, many viewers found themselves in tears, realizing that behind her bright morning smile was a silent battle she had been enduring for far longer than anyone knew. To understand why Savannah's absence affected so many people so deeply, one has to look at the woman standing at the very summit of American television. Savannah was never merely a pretty face, reading words from a teleprompter. She was a commanding presence, a razor-sharp intellect, capable of confronting presidents and steering the most heated political discussions without ever glancing at a note card. Born in Tucson, Savannah was raised in a middle-class family grounded in enduring values. She was never handed a golden ticket into the television industry. No one paved a glamorous road for her success. All she possessed was relentless discipline and a deep desire to pursue truth. That is why she first became a practicing attorney, a demanding profession requiring absolute precision, before eventually turning toward journalism. That career transition was not a gamble, but proof of her capability. In the brutal world of television, where appearance is often valued more than substance, Savannah proved that intelligence, preparation, and integrity were still the strongest weapons of all. Audiences respected her not only because of her confident on-screen presence, but because they sensed the authenticity of someone who had climbed every rung of her career through sheer determination. She did not simply deliver the news, she delivered reassurance. Every morning when she appeared on screen, viewers felt as though a wise and steady friend was helping them navigate a chaotic world, offering calm in the middle of endless storms of information. Behind the radiant smile, warm voice, and polished composure was a woman carrying pressures few people could truly imagine. Savannah Guthrie's day did not begin when the studio lights switched on. It began before 4 a.m., in the stillness of darkness while most of the world remained asleep. As one of television's defining anchors, she carried more than the responsibility of reporting the news. She also served as an emotional foundation for millions of viewers. Every day, she absorbed horrifying global headlines, political turmoil, and natural disasters, only to walk calmly into the studio and transform those heavy realities into reassurance for the audience. Crew members often described her as working with an almost superhuman level of willpower. She rarely appeared tired, always composed, always sharp. Yet many quietly recognized that beneath her professionalism was a machine running beyond its limits, fueled not by abundant energy, but by the exhaustion of her own spirit. Still, Savannah's greatest burden did not come from her demanding career, but from motherhood itself. Becoming the mother of 2 children, Vale and Charlie, after marrying Michael Feldman in 2014, completely reshaped her understanding of life. For Savannah, being a mother became the place where she discovered her truest self, far beyond fame or social status. Yet, because she loved her family so deeply, she also faced the painful conflict familiar to many modern women, the agony of dividing herself between a career demanding total sacrifice and the longing to be fully present for the children growing up beside her. She constantly tried to keep every aspect of life under control, preparing breakfast, taking her children to school, and studying hundreds of pages of material before interviewing world leaders. She feared that if she ever showed weakness, if she allowed herself to rest or ask for help, the carefully balanced structure of her life would collapse. Colleagues often remarked that she was running on willpower, a resource that inevitably runs dry. Yet she continued carrying every responsibility on her shoulders, because she never wanted anyone around her to worry about her. It was more than dedication. It was a heartbreaking form of compassion, where she willingly burned herself out in order to keep providing light for others. Sometimes tragedy does not arrive like a violent storm, but quietly slips into the most ordinary moments of life. In 2017, during a carefree afternoon playing with her young son Charlie, a freak accident occurred. A toy accidentally struck Savannah directly in the eye. It seemed at first like nothing more than a painful mishap, yet it marked the beginning of a long and exhausting ordeal. The impact caused a torn retina, an injury requiring extremely delicate medical treatment and a recovery process far more difficult than anyone could imagine. But for Savannah, the most terrifying part was not the physical pain itself, but the fear of losing her eyesight, the very tool upon which her entire career depended. For years afterward, the public continued seeing her appear on television with the same confident smile as though nothing had happened. Viewers watched her read the teleprompter flawlessly, stare directly into the camera with steady composure, and interview important figures with remarkable agility. Yet, behind that polished professionalism was a brutal reality. Savannah was working while suffering from severely impaired vision. Imagine, every morning beneath the blinding studio lights that are essentially enemies to injured eyes. She forced herself to read every line, track every movement of her guests, while her vision blurred or became obstructed by lingering complications from the retinal tear. It was an extraordinary act of endurance she kept hidden from the world. She did not want the audience to share in her fear. She did not want her colleagues to accommodate her because of weakness. And above all, she refused to let a physical limitation become a barrier, preventing her from continuing the work she loved. That endurance was not weakness, but the highest form of professional devotion. Yet the price she paid was enormous. At the end of every workday, once she stepped away from the studio and shed the image of perfection, she was left facing the relentless pain in her eyes. A constant ache that served as a reminder that the human body is not made of steel, and that even the strongest resilience eventually reaches its breaking point. In journalism, people often speak about the glamorous careers of television anchors, but few ever discuss the cost of becoming an emotional container for the entire world. Savannah Guthrie, as the face of the Today Show, was never simply reporting the news. She was standing on the front lines every morning, absorbing humanity's grief, chaos, and suffering. When the global pandemic erupted, when political conflicts divided nations, or when natural disasters devastated entire communities, Savannah was the person who had to walk into the studio, stare directly into the camera, and deliver those painful realities into millions of homes. For her, this was never just routine journalism. Every broadcast she delivered, every interview she conducted with people enduring unimaginable hardship, left psychological scars behind. It was the weight of what experts call secondary trauma. Like emergency doctors or rescue workers, journalists operating under intense emotional pressure are forced to witness endless suffering without ever being given time to recover from it. Savannah continuously buried her own emotions in order to maintain the calm composure required of her. Slowly, those suppressed feelings accumulated in silence, like a glass filling dangerously close to the edge. She was no longer carrying only her personal burdens, the pain in her injured eyes or the pressures of motherhood, but also the emotional anxieties of millions of viewers who placed their trust in her every day. Eventually, the exhaustion stopped being merely physical. It became a gradual erosion of the soul itself. The constant need to appear strong while absorbing wave after wave of devastating news pushed her emotional endurance to its most fragile limit. Audiences still saw a Savannah who seemed perfectly fine, but those closest to her began noticing the cracks. She was no longer the endlessly smiling woman people thought they knew, but a human being, struggling desperately to keep her emotional world from shattering under the pressure of everyone else's pain. That was the moment when an emergency collapse became almost unavoidable. When news broke that Savannah Guthrie had been rushed to the hospital, it was far more than another entertainment headline. It became a wake-up call for an entire nation's empathy. The connection between Savannah and her audience had long surpassed the ordinary relationship between television host and viewer. For millions of people, she was the trusted voice greeting them before the day began, the comforting companion who helped calm their minds before they faced the pressures of life themselves. When her chair suddenly sat empty, the sense of loss spread quickly. But perhaps even more powerful was the guilt viewers began to feel. For years, audiences had become so accustomed to seeing Savannah appear flawless, smiling, and composed, regardless of how chaotic the world became, that they unconsciously started believing she was invulnerable. Now, as the truth about her hidden pain, her damaged eyesight, and her emotional exhaustion slowly emerged, the public realized with shock that they had expected far too much from one human being. People began recognizing that for years, they had unknowingly consumed her strength as though it were infinite. The flood of messages and prayers pouring across social media were not simply wishes for recovery. They became heartfelt confessions from viewers themselves. "We're sorry we didn't realize you were hurting." It was a painful but meaningful awakening. Audiences no longer saw her merely as a television icon, but as a real human being made of flesh and emotion. They understood that Savannah had never been performing the role of a strong woman. She genuinely believed that her purpose of serving others mattered more than her own suffering. Ironically, that silent sacrifice did not distance her from people. It brought her closer to them, transforming her into a symbol of compassion, someone who reminded the world that even the strongest individuals deserve permission to fall apart sometimes. When Savannah Guthrie finally returned to the studio, she did not attempt to bury her pain beneath polished PR speeches or empty inspirational slogans. Instead, she chose honesty, a weapon even sharper than the resilience she had displayed for so many years. She spoke openly about the nights she spent awake in her hospital bed at 3 a.m., surrounded by darkness and consumed by fear. For a woman who had spent her entire life mastering every situation, admitting fear became a monumental turning point. She spoke candidly about the terror of losing her eyesight, not only because it threatened her career, but because it struck at the core of her identity itself. "If I can no longer clearly see the world, who am I?" It was a haunting confession that exposed the vulnerability of someone audiences had always assumed could never be broken. But perhaps the most powerful statement she made was this: "I'm learning how to ask for help." For Savannah, like so many modern women, asking for help had always felt like a luxury, or worse, a sign of weakness. She had lived for years believing that self-reliance defined personal worth. Yet lying in a hospital bed forced her to confront a difficult truth. Asking for help is not the act of a failure, but the act of someone brave enough to acknowledge their limits honestly. Her willingness to publicly admit that struggle created a profound wave of empathy. It shattered the invisible wall separating broadcaster from audience, transforming her from a flawless media figure into something far more human. A companion, reminding others that sometimes the bravest thing a person can say is, "I'm not okay. I need support." Savannah Guthrie's journey, from the bright lights of the studio to a hospital bed and back again with newfound understanding, created an entirely new definition of resilience. In the past, people often measured strength through endurance, hiding scars, suppressing tears, and continuing forward no matter the cost. But Savannah's ordeal permanently changed that definition. Real strength, she discovered, lies in vulnerability. She became a living reminder that resilience is not the absence of pain or struggle, but the courage to admit when you are not okay. After everything she endured, Savannah emerged more open, more honest, and less obsessed with maintaining perfect control over every aspect of her life. She was no longer a monument carved from steel, but a real woman who had learned to value support and accept that human limitations do not diminish human worth. The final message Savannah left with her audience was no longer the polished glamour of a television star, but the warmth of a person who had walked through darkness and discovered genuine light on the other side. She proved that asking for help is not weakness. It may be one of the bravest acts a human being can ever make. The story of Savannah Guthrie and the awakening that followed her health crisis raises an uncomfortable but necessary question. How often are we silently crushing ourselves beneath impossible standards of perfection, just as she once did? If this exploration of Savannah Guthrie's journey offered you a deeper perspective on the strength hidden inside vulnerability, remember to save or share this story. Thank you for staying through the end of this emotional journey.